Boney M., the frontman of the disco supergroup from the 1970s, has away at the age of 61. Bobby Farrell's passing has left the music industry in mourning. One of the most recognizable disco performances of the 1970s had him as its wild-eyed, high-kicking, and electrifying face. But Bobby Farrell passed away in a motel room by himself. The man who delighted millions with Boney M's throbbing anthems and danced as Rasputin left more questions than answers. Rumors and inconsistencies surrounded Farrell's work for decades. However, in the years after his untimely death on December 30, 2010, a more dismal and distinct picture has started to take shape. At last, the enigma surrounding Bobby Farrell has been solved. It's not good news either. Let's expose the reality. The whole truth. Mysterious health issues prior to passing away. In front of an excited audience, Bobby Farrell gave his signature high-energy performance on December 29, 2010 in St. Petersburg, Russia. Farrell was still touring in his 60s and 61 years old at the time, but he was part of an Eastern European circuit that included dates in Russia and other nearby nations where Boney M's music continued to enjoy enduring appeal. Some of the band's greatest hits, including the ironically prophetic Rasputin, were played during the concert. Being in the spotlight wasn't the only reason Farrell kept performing. They were essential. Despite Boney M's worldwide success, Farrell received few royalties because she was primarily compensated as a performer rather as a songwriter or owner of the rights. He faced financial difficulties over the years and frequently had to go on lengthy tours in order to make ends meet. Although he had few options, friends and close colleagues have observed that he was worn out from the continual travel and workload. Even as his health began to deteriorate, performing live continued to be his main source of revenue. His dedication to the stage, which was fueled in part by financial necessity, adds to the tragedy of his untimely passing. When he finally got back to his Ambassador Hotel Room 108 that fateful night, he complained of chest pain and trouble breathing. He then admitted to feeling ill following the concert. According to those close to him, he was discovered dead in his room by hotel workers the following morning, December 30. There were no apparent indications of foul play, and Russian medical officials attributed his death to heart failure. Questions were nevertheless raised by the peculiar circumstances surrounding his death, especially the time, place, and his grievances the previous evening. The speed at which the investigation was closed and the lack of autopsy details, beyond a general cause of death, alarmed some fans and onlookers. Speculation increased. In order to sustain himself financially, Farrell had been touring virtually non-stop in the years preceding 2010. He took many reservations across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, sometimes in small clubs and private occasions. Despite having little financial stability, he has a medical background as well. During a 2005 documentary in the Netherlands, he acknowledged the effects of constant performance and long-term fatigue. He looked emotionally and physically exhausted. Those that worked with him said he had been pushing himself too hard, but no official medical record describing chronic illnesses has been made public. According to Zenelia Farrell, his daughter, Dad liked performing to the very end and would not stop working. The question still stands, though, should he have been performing at all, given the physical strain? Furthermore, Farrell's performance on December 29, 2010 was by no means a simple set, which added to the uneasiness. Even though he appeared exhausted, club employees and audience attendees said he gave a full-length performance that included dancing routines. He nevertheless gave it his all, according to witnesses. Until the very end, his act maintained the exuberant manner that had characterized his theatrical appearance since the 1970s. Ferocious dancing, passionate gestures, and tremendous physical output. These elements have led some to wonder if Farrell was under pressure to keep performing even though there were indications that his body was unable to keep up. Despite the fact that there is no proof of compulsion, the entertainment industry's detractors point to structural problems that leave elderly performers, particularly those without royalties or residual income, with little choice but to continue performing. Farrell's predicament was similar to that of many elderly entertainers, who are forced to go past their safe limit after being denied long-term financial stability. When one's livelihood depends on upholding a public image, the distinction between dedication and necessity becomes more hazy. Naturally, there is a price for this. Most significantly, Farrell was not given the proper medical assistance despite his complaints of chest trouble. It's unclear if hotel employees or any tour managers were informed of the severity of his symptoms, and no emergency services were summoned that evening. Shortness of breath and chest pain, particularly in older men, are regarded in cardiovascular medicine as high-priority red flags, indicating possible acute coronary syndrome. His life could have been spared if medical help had been sought that evening. Even if there isn't any hard proof of foul play, various theories about it still circulate online and among enthusiasts. According to some, Farrell's passing was too tidy and happened in a way that conveniently ended his lifetime of friendship with Rasputin. Others argue that the official story should be questioned because of how Bonum members have historically been treated. The circumstances surrounding his death continue to elicit thought and skepticism, regardless of whether it was preventable or just a cruel fate. However, the tragedy is far from over. Absence of thorough research or media attention. In light of the situation, an international pop singer passes away by suicide in a foreign nation the evening following a public concert in a historically significant city that is directly related to one of his most well-known songs. Many anticipated a rush of press releases, official inquiries, and more thorough reporting. Instead, there were only a few short obituaries and wire service items. Within a few days, official information was limited, and his death appeared to have vanished from the attention of the world's media. This quiet raised suspicions in the minds of many observers. His death was promptly attributed to heart failure by Russian officials, and no further autopsy results were made public. Although the official explanation was natural causes, there were questions about how quickly the investigation was closed. A more thorough investigation would have been expected, especially one that included diplomatic notification, a post-mortem report, and coordination with Dutch authorities. Considering that Farrell was a foreign national performing in a foreign city and had reported health issues just hours before his death, the response from the media was noticeably muted. The majority of the brief uniform pieces published by major media outlets like the BBC, Reuters, and The Guardian drew mainly from Russian press agencies like Interfax and RIA Novosti. There were no detailed features. There was no investigative reporting on what happened in his last hours, no interviews with the hotel personnel who discovered him, and no obvious pressure from entertainment writers to learn more. When compared to other celebrity deaths that occurred within the same decade, the difference was striking. When Michael Jackson died in 2009, causing a media maelstrom to sweep the globe, extended publicity was typical, even when lesser-known celebrities passed away under strange circumstances. However, attention was oddly sparse for Farrell, the frontman of one of the most financially successful musical groups in Europe. Some people assumed that his waning celebrity contributed to this subdued media reaction. Although they were still well known in Eastern Europe and certain parts of Asia, Bonum had lost its reputation in North America by 2010. Farrell was mostly viewed as a nostalgia act because he had not put out any hit songs in decades. He might have been reduced to the status of a fading celebrity in the eyes of the Western media. However, many people find this justification to be implausible, particularly in light of the unusual circumstances surrounding his passing. In the same place and on the same day as the historical character he represented in one of his most well-known songs, an elderly celebrity passes away unexpectedly. Grigory Rasputin was assassinated on December 30, 1916, in St. Petersburg. The geopolitical background is another factor contributing to the silence. It is not easy for a foreign entertainer to die in Russia. The 2010 Russian media landscape was strictly regulated, particularly during the administration of President Dmitry Medvedev, when many newsrooms engaged in self-censorship or shunned delicate subjects, unless authorized by the government. Foreign deaths, especially those of performers who aren't considered politically significant, might not be given much attention in such a context. Additionally, Farrell's passing happened during a period when global news was dominated by significant worldwide catastrophe, which could account for the lack of media coverage of his death. The globe was still dealing with the terrible fallout from the January earthquake in Haiti, which claimed over 200,000 lives and sparked protracted international relief efforts. In early 2010, as this was going on, the WikiLeaks controversy had broken out, exposing mountains of secret U.S. diplomatic cables that made headlines and sparked tensions between nations on different continents. The aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis, which still caused instability, austerity measures, and public protests across Europe and abroad, added to this already intense news cycle. The unexpected passing of a 1970s pop star, no matter how famous, found it difficult to garner media attention in the midst of such urgent world events. There were probably less options for in-depth tributes or investigative follow-up from major news outlets because of the time. In any event, Informal beliefs were further encouraged by the lack of any obvious inquiry or follow-up. Some fans and analysts began to query whether Farrell had received proper care after his chest trouble symptoms. Others questioned whether someone from the entertainment industry had any justification for putting an end to any sustained interest. While there is no tangible evidence of crime and no foul play was formally reported, the opacity of the case has fueled intrigue. Later, Zenelia Farrell, his daughter, expressed dissatisfaction with how her father's legacy was handled. She confessed that he had been pushing himself too hard and living under continual pressure to continue performing, even though she certified that the cause of death was heart-related. However, no formal retrospectives or documentaries appeared in the immediate wake of his death, and neither she nor any of his close associates were asked to do lengthy interviews by major networks. Even in the Farrell had lived most of his adult life in the Netherlands. Memorial events were modest. He was laid to rest in Zorgel Cemetery in Amsterdam. Additionally, there was no significant state or local recognition, despite the fact that fans did congregate to honor him. In many respects, the hush following his passing reflected the underpayment, disregard, and misunderstanding he had frequently described in his later years, despite his contribution to drawing attention to Dutch Caribbean performers on a global scale. A man who actually personified a myth on stage, helped sell tens of millions of records, and became a symbol of disco's global reach, deserved more than a footnote that he was denied. Many have questioned whether more ought to have been said, asked, and known, and it has only served to deepen the mystery. He didn't actually sing on Bonham Records. On October 6, 1949, Roberto Alonso Farrell was born in San Nicolas, Aruba, which was then a part of the Netherlands Antilles. He eventually moved in Europe after leaving home at the age of 15 to pursue a career as a sailor. He ended himself in Germany in the early 1970s, after bouncing around different European towns, doing odd jobs and dancing in clubs. Record producer Frank Frian was drawn to him there because of his talent for performing, his distinct Caribbean-European character, and his exuberant dancing style. One of the most recognizable disco acts of the 1970s, Boney M., was born out of this meeting. The group's breakthrough record, Daddy Cool, became an immediate hit, especially in Europe, and they shot to fame. The band lineup consisted of Liz Mitchell, Marcia Barrett, Maisie Williams, and Bobby Farrell, with Farrell becoming the visual centerpiece of the ensemble. Farrell ruled the stage with his theatrical dancing, miming, and stage presence, while wearing extravagant costumes and radiating charisma. Behind the scenes, however, things were completely different. He became the face of Boney M., with his unique afro hairstyle, wild movements, and magnetic charisma. Bobby Farrell was the group's male performer, but he didn't sing on the recordings made in the studio. Frank Frian actually recorded all of the male vocals heard on Boney M's songs, including classics like Rivers of Babylon, Rasputin, and Ma Baker. A skilled vocalist and producer, Frian first used his own voice to release Baby, Do You Want to Bump in 1975 under the moniker Boney M. He put together an actual group to perform the song live after it became popular. The three female singers and Bobby Farrell came into the scene in this way. The public was unaware that the song's deep baritone wasn't actually Farrell's. Fans were unaware of this arrangement for a few years. During interviews, Farrell would either deliberately steer clear of the subject entirely, or talk as if he had sung on the recordings. Frian didn't acknowledge in public that he had performed the male vocals himself until the early 1980s. There was a stir after the revelation. Bobby Farrell's fans were astonished to discover that the voice they had grown up identifying with his persona wasn't actually his. Many believed that the group and the music business as a whole had deceived them by maintaining the illusion for financial benefit. This discovery had long-term effects on Bobby Farrell's career and personal life, though he continued to serve as Boney M's frontman throughout their live shows and individual projects. The truth prompted uncomfortable concerns about agency, authenticity, and exploitation in the entertainment sector. Later in adulthood, Farrell himself complained about the state of affairs. In a number of interviews, he disclosed that, although having tried out as a vocalist and thought he would be permitted to contribute vocally, he had felt marginalized and degraded by Frian's choice to leave his voice off the records. Conversely, Frank Frian defended his choice by claiming that maintaining a specific sound was more important than Farrell's voice, which was unsuitable for the studio. With other artists he produced, like Milli Vanilli, whose members were notoriously exposed in a similar issue and had their Grammy annulled in 1990, Frian employed the same strategy. The disclosure also brought to light more general problems in the music business, specifically those related to race, power, and image. Black Caribbean performer Bobby Farrell was positioned as the public face of a group that was doing well financially, whilst a white German producer, working in the background, provided the voice for the male parts. This relationship has led academics and critics to investigate the racial and commercial foundations of the European disco scene of the 1970s, and the ways in which black musicians were frequently used as marketable or visual icons, without receiving full creative credit or control. In spite of this, Bobby Farrell toured as Boney M. until his death in 2010, frequently without the original members. Even when the vocals' truth was revealed, he continued to be adored by people who valued the spirit and nostalgia of the disco period. In his latter years, Farrell acknowledged that Boney M had improved his life, but he was also resentful of the way he had been handled. From a sailor, he had become a worldwide celebrity, appearing on TV shows and in stadiums in Asia, Africa, and Europe. The trio is still among the most commercially successful artists of the disco period, having sold over 80 million records worldwide. Was it, however, as good as it could be? The coincidence of Rasputin's death, Bobby Farrell's death date and location, December 30, 2010 in Street. The date and site of the notorious assassination of Grigory Rasputin, the mystic advisor to the Romanovs, were precisely matched by Petersburg, Russia. On December 30, 1916, he was murdered in the same city, which was then known as Petrograd. A coincidence like this can go unnoticed by the majority of public figures. Farrell's situation, however, was distinct. He had been playing Rasputin, one of his band's most famous tunes, as the man himself for decades. Naturally, his death's uncanny timing sparked a flurry of superstition, symbolism, and conjecture that hasn't subsided even after years. The character mentioned in the Boney M song, Grigory Rasputin, was a very contentious figure in Russia in the early 20th century. Many members of the Russian nobility hated Rasputin because they felt he had too much power over the royal family, particularly in the turbulent years preceding the Russian Revolution. He was born in Siberia in 1869 and rose from peasant obscurity to become a trusted spiritual advisor to Tsina Alexandra, wife of Tsar Nicholas II. His demise was terrible and spectacular. He was poisoned, shot many times, and dumped into the frozen Neva River by conspirators. After his body was recovered from the freezing water, December 30, 1916, was noted as the official date of his death. Rasputin was published by Bonham as a part of their album, Night Flight to Venus, in the late 1970s. The song used flashy disco to tell Rasputin's life narrative, combining myth and reality to create a compelling story hook. With its throbbing beat, campy historical lyrics, and Bobby Farrell's legendary live performances, it became an enormous smash, particularly in Europe. Farrell, dressed as Rasputin, would embody the mystic's turmoil and magnetism for cheering crowds by dancing with frantic energy, eyes wide, limbs swinging. The lyrics of the song, however, significantly alter historical reality. The most contentious sentence, Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen, implies that Rasputin was romantically involved with Tsar Nicholas II's wife, Empress Alexandra Theodorovna. Although Rasputin had a unique level of access to the royal family, and their friendship was very close, there is no reliable historical evidence to substantiate the notion that they were lovers. Around 1905, Rasputin won the Romanovs over because he was able to ease the suffering of Alex Nikolaevich, their only son, who suffered from hemophilia, a genetic blood condition. Desperate and profoundly religious, Alexandra thought Rasputin's prayers could heal. The Russian clergy and aristocracy closely monitored and reacted negatively to their reliance on him, especially Alexandra's. Though they were a part of a larger smear campaign, there were rumors of an affair. Rasputin was a lightning rod for popular discontent. By 1916, when the Russian Empire was on the verge of revolt, he was seen by politics, nobility, and even members of the royal court as a dangerous charlatan who was taking advantage of the empress. Anti-Romanov pamphlets, newspaper articles, and underground literature painted him as a debauched mystic, corrupting the monarchy from within. The media presented graphic images of him arranging political appointments, drinking excessively, and wooing aristocratic women. The tale of his being the empress's lover arose from this poisonous concoction of social animosity, political expediency, and gossip. The phrase Russia's greatest love machine, which contributes to the myth of Rasputin as a sexophobic hypnotist, is another example of hyperbole. Some of the female followers of Rasputin may have had romantic or sexual relationships with him. But once more, the allegations of orgies and cult-like seduction that round his reputation now have their roots more in controversy and propaganda than in historical accounts that can be independently verified. His strange conduct and popularity with ladies are described in Russian police surveillance records from the time period, but they do not go so far as to corroborate the outrageous excesses that are frequently ascribed to him. The complex circumstances behind Rasputin's assassination are likewise simplified in the song. In line with popular accounts of his death, the lyrics read, "They put some poison into his wine. He drank it all and said, 'I feel fine.'" A group of aristocrats led by Prince Felix Yusupov, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, and several other conspirators killed Rasputin on December 30, 1916, because they thought his power over the royal family threatened the stability of Russia. Although most of Yusupov's tale is now regarded as a theatrical embellishment, Yusupov's memoirs state that they first attempted to poison him with wine and pastries laced with cyanide, and when he failed to die, they shot him many times, beat him, and finally tossed his body into the Neva River. Interestingly, these same characteristics, lover of the queen, impossible to kill, and endowed with strange powers, made Rasputin a perfect fit for a folk villain from the disco era. Producer Frank Farian, who wrote and produced Rasputin, combined dance beats, pop history, and European folklore to create a hit that resonated across continents. A postmortem revealed that he died from a gunshot wound rather than drowning or poisoning. The song topped charts in countries like Germany, Austria, and Australia, and remains a cult classic to this day. But its continued popularity also sustains misconceptions. Historians often point to Rasputin as an example of how pop culture can overshadow historical fact, especially when catchy narratives are involved. When news broke that Farrell had died in room 108 of the Ambassador Hotel in St. Petersburg, the same city where Rasputin had been killed the same day, stunned both fans and the media. Rasputin had played a live concert the previous evening, December 29, 2010, and had gone back to his room, complaining of breathing problems. Hotel staff discovered him unconscious the following morning. The cause of death was determined to be heart failure, and there were no indications of foul play. Although British newspapers called it a real-life Rasputin curse, others called it a full-circle moment, with an artist passing away on the very historical footprint of the character he had played for decades. Nevertheless, the symbolism was too strong for many to ignore. Others said that Farrell's life and death revealed deeper truths about how show business transforms myth into performance, and sometimes swallows its performers in the process. The coincidence was made even more unsettling by the fact that Farrell had never stopped performing Rasputin. In fact, he was still on tour in the weeks before his death, touring Russia and Eastern Europe, returning to the very stages where Boney M had once triumphed during the Cold War era. And his final performance was in street, financial exploitation, and industry injustice. While Bonham became internationally famous in the late 1970s and early 1980s, selling over 80 million records worldwide, and producing chart-topping hits like Daddy Cool, Rivers of Babylon, Ma Baker, and Rasputin, Farrell himself did not share in the kind of wealth or fame that Bonham had become known for since the 1970s. He performed for a small but enthusiastic audience at Petersburg's Uptown Club, still giving the crowd that manic energy he had been known for since the 1970s. Stability one might anticipate from such accomplishments. The group was manufactured and closely managed by German record producer Frank Farian, whose musical choices and business sense made Bonham a major player in the world disco scene. But this control also meant that the members, especially Farrell, had little influence over the financial and artistic choices that shaped their careers. Being Boney M's sole male performer and most visually noticeable member, Farrell became the group's face in live performances, captivating audiences around the world with his outrageous dance moves, quirky costumes, and charisma on stage. However, beneath this theatrical exterior was a man who, according to several accounts, was rarely treated as an equal stakeholder in the group's success. Farrell acknowledged in interviews that he received a salary instead of a cut of record sales royalties, which may have seemed reasonable at first, particularly for a producer-led act such as Boney M. But as the group's global recognition increased, the disparity became more noticeable and concerning. Financially struggling by the 1990s, Farrell continued to perform in small venues throughout Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, often under the name Bonham, even when none of the original members were involved, and was briefly imprisoned in the Netherlands in 2003 for not paying child support and alimony to his ex-wife. During one interview, Farrell stated that he had to keep touring just to make ends meet. Here was a man whose livelihood still depended on a legacy, from which he had been largely excluded in monetary terms. Several music industry analysts and fans have pointed to Farrell's situation as emblematic of a deeper systemic problem: how record labels and producers have frequently taken advantage of artists, particularly those from underrepresented groups. Boney M was signed to Hansa Records, a German label that was part of the BMG Bertelsmann Music Group, and the royalty arrangements of these contracts were rarely clear. The group's architect, Frank Frian, kept both production and vocal control, which allowed him to keep a disproportionately large portion of the group's profits. Although Frian has never been officially charged with financial misconduct, his business model, in which performers were tightly managed and frequently replaced, has long been criticized. The question of royalties became especially controversial in the years when Bonham's back catalog was reissued on CD and digital platforms, including commercially successful compilation albums such as 20 Super Hits, Boney M Gold, and The Magic of Boney M, none of which brought in a significant amount of money for Farrell. When songs he helped popularize continued to earn money, fans started to wonder how the group's most identifiable member could be left financially behind. Farrell told the Daily Mirror in 2007 that he made more money from live shows in the 2000s than he ever did during the group's peak. Although he did not name anyone, he also implied that he had been defrauded of what he was due, which has influenced how many people remember Farrell today. He is frequently called a used man in fan communities, and his death in a small hotel room in St. Petersburg, Russia, in 2010 following a performance in front of a small audience, struck many as tragically symbolic. The Boney M catalog continues to be very profitable, especially in Europe, Africa, and parts of Asia where disco nostalgia is still strong. Cases like his have led to calls for more fairness in contract negotiations, particularly for performers from minority backgrounds, who are often at a disadvantage when entering the industry. Bobby Farrell's experience is not unique, but it is particularly stark given the scale of Boney M's commercial success. It illustrates the disparity between fame and fortune, talent and compensation, and how the appearance of success can sometimes mask the reality of exploitation. Nevertheless, the man who arguably gave the group its most iconic visual identity passed away without financial security. That's everything for now. Thank you for watching. Did you enjoy this video? If so, please consider liking, commenting, and clicking the subscribe button so that you don't miss any of our future uploads. Furthermore, don't miss this incredible video that is currently on your screen.